Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Well, excited to catch up on some great posts you wrote recently. I thought maybe we could start with the Trump executive orders. You had a few analyses on them. I wanted to run this. Balaji, our friend, had this tweet basically where he was claiming that the executive orders were meticulously planned to strike at every single source of blue power simultaneously, both in the U.S. and abroad. Is that too? Is that exaggerating? Is there a sense of accuracy there? I'll put that as a segue for let's talk about the executive orders.
I don't know what blue power exactly means.
Sort of democratic stuff, influence, perhaps.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, certainly I think that Trump sees himself to some degree as at war with the civil service. So he's basically trying to get them to stop doing DEI or do various other stuff. And so there's a lot of chaotic things that he's doing. He's trying to use presidential power, probably overuse presidential power to pause spending and stuff that they're doing. And they're trying to do malicious compliance where they make things actually worse so that people blame Trump for, making things worse. So there's sort of a power struggle, because essentially the civil service is pretty progressive, full of libs, and he would rather it not be like that. And so it's a protracted power struggle. Ultimately, Trump will win it because he's the boss of the executive branch. He may certain procedural things that he does may get struck down by the courts, right? Like firing these inspectors general and things like that. But ultimately, you are the executive. You get to hire all the people, right? And there's certain pre-existing commitments to people that you have to honor legally. But ultimately, people aren't gonna work for Trump if they can't handle this kind of thing. So I think that there's essentially a large purge of the civil service going on. Purge isn't a word we like to use in America very much. It's a word you hear a lot in connection with authoritarian regimes. Usually in democratic regimes, we think of power as being sort of distributed. We think of sort of a bureaucracy as being stable and blah, blah, blah. And, we think of distributed power, but we don't think of an elected king, essentially. But then when you hear about purges, especially for ideological reasons, that's usually something you hear about in connection with a developing country, or at least a middle income country like Turkey or something like that. And so that's, that probably makes a lot of people nervous, and it probably should make a lot of people nervous.
That makes sense. Why don't we comment on the EOs more broadly? Were they surprising to you? Were they sort of as expected? How would you sort of characterize them more broadly? I know there's some you were excited about and some that you were, not a fan of.
Yeah, so I think that the EOs are still coming. I think that some of them are obviously just overreaches, illegal stuff. You can't end birthright citizenship. The Constitution is pretty clear. I expect the Supreme Court to not uphold Trump's interpretation of the Constitution. And then there's a question of as to whether or not Trump obeys the Supreme Court. So, what happens if the Supreme Court says, no, you have to give these people citizenship, and Trump just directs Citizenship and Immigration Services to not do that? I'm not actually sure what the procedure for that is. The Supreme Court doesn't have an army, and so Trump could be just like you. And what I mean, that's what we call a constitutional crisis, right? It's the president has to obey what the Supreme Court does according to the law, but what if the president doesn't do that? So Trump really did do a coup when he lost the 2020 election and tried to overturn it. That was a real coup. And not obeying the Supreme Court, just blatantly defying the Supreme Court would be another kind of coup-ish, assuming dictatorial powers. So he could do that, or he could decide not to do that. And so we still don't know what he's going to do. And one problem with responding to some of these things is that some of these things he backs off on. So the other day, I think yesterday, he issued an executive order freezing all spending, saying Congress has said that we have to spend all this money, but we're just not gonna do it. And then so that of course will go to the courts, they'll be sued, blah, blah, blah. And then, but then he kind of backed off and said, okay, we're only freezing some things. And then, there was an order freezing all foreign aid. It's not clear which things are exempted from that. So there's just a lot of chaos being created. This is not, if you're someone who sits there and says that government is just a parasite upon the economy, upon the world, maybe you like seeing this kind of thing. But I think that modern advanced society takes a lot of government to function, and anarchy doesn't work well, and this kind of chaos may not have really hurt the country substantially yet. I don't see this being a good thing.
Yeah. So you're not a fan of the overreach, particularly as it relates to immigration.
No, yeah, I mean, like the birthright citizenship thing is just clear overreach. But then, some of the things look pretty smart and well designed, like the sort of trying to nerf NEPA by turning a rule about NEPA guidance into loose guidance for these administrative agencies. Basically, the Council on Environmental Quality used to give its recommendations, and those were binding. If they said you had to go through environmental review, then you did. Now it's just like a recommendation. So people might not go through it, but of course, each agency will have to deal with that in its own way. Some will, some won't. But it's just, I like to see attacks on NEPA on red tape, and it seems perfectly legal. So that's one that I like. But then there's the one where he basically pauses all leases for renewable energy, including solar and wind, on federal land and water. That'll really kill the offshore wind industry because the federal government owns the water, right? But then on land, it won't do that much because most of this stuff's on private land, and it'll do some, it'll hurt the industry a little bit, but it won't kill it, certainly. But this is stupid. Solar energy works and wind energy works. Offshore wind's pretty expensive, but there's no reason to stop it if people want to do it. Meanwhile, the solar's cheap and wind is pretty cheap, and Texas just builds tons of this stuff. You're kneecapping Texas's energy strategy. Why would you do that? What's the benefit of kneecapping Texas's energy strategy? Texas building more solar and wind and batteries than anyone else in the country. Why would you kneecap that? I don't understand.
Is he just misinformed, or do you think it's special interests, or how would you?
I think it's culture wars. I honestly just think it's culture wars. I think, and just sort of this instinctive NIMBYism of oh, look at those ugly solar farms, look at those ugly windmills. There is some of that. He actually said that in an interview. But I think that it's culture wars. Biden, when he first got in, paused fossil fuel stuff on federal land leases. Then later, Biden became very pro fossil fuels and pumped fossil fuel stuff to all-time highs, and that was good. So Biden ended up being a great president for fossil fuels, even though he started off attacking them. And the Ukraine war was the reason for that pivot. But it certainly shows that what you do in the first 100 days is not necessarily what characterizes your entire presidency. So Trump could still turn around and become a big wind and solar booster. I don't expect him to, but he could. Just as Biden became a big fossil fuel booster. But I think Trump feels like fossil fuels are our energy, the red energy, and solar and wind are the blue energy, the evil, liberal hippie energy. And we've got to, if they strike at us, we've got to strike at them, tit for tat. That's stupid. That's just anti-technology. That's decel. And I really think that, I didn't know if you're going to ask me about this one I wrote yesterday, but I really think that we're seeing this pattern emerge where Republicans fear the physical technologies of the future, whereas Democrats fear the software technology.
Yeah, that's a really interesting pattern to observe. Do you think it's just kind of emergent, or how do you explain it?
Well, you can explain some of it in terms of basic fundamental economic incentives. So, for example, a lot of Republicans work in the oil and gas industry. It's threatened by new energy technologies that supersede oil and gas, that are better than oil and gas, right? Batteries, solar, these are better. They're not totally better everywhere yet, but they're getting there. They're really getting there. If you're an oil and gas person, you're threatened by that, and so it makes sense. And you're probably a Republican. Those are Republican-leaning industries. But then, if you're a Democrat, you're probably an educated professional. Educated professionals are, well, if you're an educated professional, you're probably a Democrat, let's say. And so a lot of the core sort of Democratic base is educated professionals. And educated professionals could be threatened by AI paralegal services, or Facebook taking all the journalism ad revenue for themselves and leaving newspapers out to dry. Or there's lots of ways in which software threatens the kind of what Musa Al-Gharbi calls symbolic capitalism, the knowledge industry sort of word rearrangement of Democrats. And of course, AI might threaten coders or might help them. We're not sure yet, but it certainly creates risk, right? And so I think that the educated professionals who are the backbone of the Democratic Party have a fundamental economic reason to fear software in a way that the owners of land and extractive physical technologies who are all Republicans have a reason to fear physical technologies. But that just doesn't explain it all, because vaccines were a physical technology that Republicans feared. Why? I don't understand. Like, I don't know why that was so Republican coded, because vaccines don't threaten the jobs of any Republican, right? There's no pure economic incentive we can look at. And then you have to go into these sort of airy bullshit theories about, how Republicans are more focused on concrete object. Conservatives think more in the physical world, and Democrats, liberals think more in the abstract realm of ideas. You can say things like that. I don't know if any of that's true, but it's certainly an interesting pattern that we're seeing, where if you can touch it and hold it in your hands, Republicans are going to be scared of it. And if it's just, symbols on a screen, Democrats are going to be scared of it.
That's that's really interesting. I mean, zooming out a bit, it's early, of course, but where do you see or anticipate Trump being a continuation of Biden versus a separation or departure from it, from sort of Biden's reign?
Um, I don't know. I think a lot of the things that Biden did were bipartisan. I think Republicans in Congress will try to fight to keep, like, the CHIPS Act and things like that. There will be a lot of efforts, or the TikTok ban, efforts to defend the bipartisan parts of Biden's legacy from Trump. But I think Trump will really try to be the anti-Biden in all things, which is different than what Biden did. Biden was the anti-Trump in some things, like immigration, but then in some things, he just continued exactly what Trump was doing, or pretty much what Trump was doing. Anti-China stuff, COVID relief stuff. Like, he really, there was a lot of continuity, and tariffs, right? There were continuity between Biden and Trump on tariffs. Biden did a lot of tariffs. So I think there will be, the thing is, Republicans want to overturn Democratic stuff for culture war reasons. Democrats only sometimes. So on immigration, that was clearly true. Biden tried to make a much more permissive immigration regime just to say fuck you to the Republicans who are anti-immigration, and let in just millions and millions of people, more people than Trump will be able to deport during his entire administration, probably. And so Biden did that, and that was a sort of a successful fuck you to the Republicans. But the Republicans basically do a whole lot of little symbolic fuck yous to the Democrats on everything, in addition to a few substantive ones.
Yeah. What are sort of the next, like, 90 days or 6 months? Like, what are the biggest things you're going to be watching as it relates to Trump, or what are the biggest questions that you have in terms of how he'll behave on certain topics or issues?
I am going to watch to see what Trump does with export controls. Export controls, this is really the acid test for whether Trump is in China's pocket or not. I think there's a good chance that Trump is in China's pocket. He's a corrupt man, a bribable man, and China has the deepest pockets to bribe him. And of course would do that through Jeff Yass or any number of other intermediaries. Could bribe Trump. Pumping Trump coin is another way you can do that. That's probably legal, not even any kind of malfeasance. That's you could just you could just pump the Trump coin. China could just buy that, and that's how they give money to Trump. China can give Trump billions of dollars into his personal wallet anytime it wants by simply having the People's Bank of China, probably through an intermediary, buy Trump coin. And as long as Trump knows they're doing this, he knows which side his bread is buttered on. And this isn't even, there's no law against that as far as I know. And if there is, but even if there is a law against it, how do you enforce that? How do you say, hey, Trump, you just took a bribe? And China's like, no, we just thought we were making a political bet on Trump coin being a winner. And then if other follow-on people invest in a Trump coin, push the price even a little bit higher, then that was a winning bet for them. And they can say, look, we knew this was going to be a winning bet. We just wanted to make a little money. And, even if you make a law against doing this kind of thing, you can't enforce it. And that could give Trump an incentive to do whatever China wants. We are living in an era of government capture and corruption, ironically, from people whose pledge is to eliminate government waste and abuse and things like that. It's like, yeah, but you're going to replace that with sort of personalistic, corrupt stuff. I don't like that. I hope America cares about that. I don't know if Americans will care about that. We haven't seen Trump's approval ratings fall yet. We've seen Elon's approval ratings fall, I guess, unfortunately, because Elon is sort of, on many things like H-1Bs or whatever, he's the voice of reason within the Trump administration. Yeah, I saw an interesting analysis of Elon's salute at the convention, which is interesting.
What did it say? What was the analysis?
So I assumed it was just an accident because it looks like just my heart goes out to you, like Macron does the same thing. So I think that's probably still the most likely story. But the interesting theory was that Elon has since the H-1B fight has been losing influence within the Trump circle because the so-called Nazi wing, Bannon and those people who are just really racist, those people have been using Elon's fight over H-1B and saying, go fuck yourself in the face, I'll fight to the death for H-1Bs. They've been using that to sort of whisper into Trump's ear and be like, Elon's bad for you. He's actually a globalist, neoliberal, right? Like worm tongue style. And shut Elon out, box Elon out of time with the president. So Elon doesn't get to be the last person Trump talked to and loses influence. And the idea was that the theory was that Elon wanted to do sort of a plausibly deniable quasi maybe sort of fascist salute to get libs mad at him with plausible deniability, to get libs so mad at him that he would regain popularity among the hard right, thus restoring his influence in the White House. I think I rate this theory as unlikely, but interesting. I still think it was just an accident. It's just, oh, my heart goes out to you. I'm so excited to be here. I think that was it. However, the idea that he was doing this as some sort of like way to anger libs in order to get the ear of the president back is an interesting theory. And if so, good luck, because I think that whatever Trump is doing now is dumber than whatever Elon would have Trump do. Like if Elon were the president instead of Trump right now, I would still have many concerns, obviously, but I would definitely think a policy will be a lot more sane than what I'm seeing now with just willy-nilly canceling this and that and fighting the courts over things, which is the kind of institutional chaos that I expected from Trump. All throughout the campaign, I was like, we shouldn't elect Trump again because we're going to see institutional chaos. He's just going to fight the institutions. That's all he's going to do. So far, that's being borne out. And there was this like moment when it looked like Elon was going to, get Trump's ear and wield power through Doge and, sort of make more reasonable policies on a lot of things. And people say Elon's captured by China because they have his factories, Gigafactory Shanghai and all these other things that he's doing in China, and that he's too soft on China. Well, that's certainly a worry. But I think that Elon making policy would be a lot smarter than Trump making policy. Trump just creates chaos. Elon fundamentally doesn't want chaos because he's a businessman. Business people don't like chaos. I mean, Elon created a bit of chaos at Twitter, but ultimately, didn't reduce Twitter's headcount by that much and is still maintaining it as like a viable business. And so but Trump is really just wrecking house here. He's wrecking the shop. So I think that might point to a decrease in Elon's influence, unfortunately.
And when you say war with the institutions, which institutions are you referring to?
The civil service and the courts.
So you're not even talking about academia or the media or...
No, I don't. I think, that's for later. Because once you have control over the civil service and you're insulated from being attacked by the courts, if you can do that, then after that, you can just do to academia and the media whatever you want.
Yeah.
But then without the civil service on your side, and if the courts are constantly stymieing you, then it becomes harder to attack those institutions.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days and not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. netsuite.com/102. Most of you probably know how much the Turpentine team loves Notion, the sponsor of today's episode. We use it every day for editorial planning, transcript markups, project managing, knowledge sharing, and it's where I drop random 3 a.m. ideas that turn into episodes. Now it has the power of AI, built right inside of Notion and woven across our entire workspace. It's been a total game changer for our productivity and focus. We just used it the other day to architect the content schedule for next month across our network. Notion combines your notes, docs, and projects into one space that's simple and beautifully designed. The fully integrated Notion AI helps you work faster, write better, and think bigger, doing tasks that normally take you hours in just seconds. Try Notion for free when you go to notion.com/upstreampod. That's all lowercase letters. Notion.com/upstreampod to try the powerful, easy to use Notion AI today. And when you use our link, you're supporting our show. That's notion.com/upstreampod.
Mark Andreessen tweeted out something like a team of rivals was always such a dumb concept, which I haven't spoken about this. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think what he's suggesting by that is this idea that sort of, usually when one party wins, it's not like they invite the people from the other party to sort of join. It's not like Democrats were like, hey, we need all these Republicans in power now, or in the office now. We need sort of political diversity. And so now that Republicans are in office, why would sort of they expect to work with Democrats in the same way? Or I guess, how would you edit the characterization of that, or / what do you think about that idea?
Well, it used to be, in the old days, it used to be that there would be a fairly substantial turnover of Republicans to Democrats and Democrats to Republicans when you had the president switch. So if like Reagan came in, a bunch of Republican political appointees would come in, or people who were just ideological conservative. That didn't happen with Trump's last term because education polarization. Essentially, everyone in the civil service is now, like everyone who wants to work in the civil service, more or less, is now a Democrat. And then all the career appointees, the so-called non-political appointees, who you're not supposed to replace. You can replace them, it's just harder, but you're not supposed to replace them. Those people used to be actually evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, and now they're all Democrats. If you replace all the political appointees with Republicans, you still have a ton of Democrats in the civil service because they're the career appointees. Now, what happens if you start replacing those people with effectively political appointees? You can fire all these career employees and then replace them with political appointees. It just takes a while, right? It takes maybe a couple of years. I don't know. But you can do this. But the question is, what do you get then? Like the value of the career civil servants is that they're, I guess, competent. They know what they're doing. Whereas political appointees just walk up and like do stuff stupidly. Do you remember, are you old enough to remember Hurricane Katrina?
Yeah, when Kanye West said George Bush hates black people. I remember that.
Right. And that was stupid. And then Kanye West became a Nazi. And that was really stupid. But, so Kanye West was stupid. But do you remember the line, heck of a job, Brownie?
No, I don't remember that.
Right. So this guy, Michael Brown, he's a political appointee heading FEMA. And he did not handle Katrina very well. George W. Bush was an incompetent man who appointed a lot of incompetent people to positions of power because they were his friends, good old boys, etc. Because of that, the nation got really mad at Bush for how he handled Hurricane Katrina. And he said, heck of a job, Brownie. You're doing a heck of a job. But then he was just meant to project this air of sunny, calm confidence. But in fact, things were going wrong. People were dying and, looting was massive. And, much of New Orleans was destroyed. And FEMA was not very quick to respond. And so Brownie did not do a heck of a job. And so how many brownies are we going to get now? That's what I worry about. The civil service is there for a reason. I understand that they don't want Democrats there. I think Project 2025 is involves a large effort to find competent Republicans for the civil service, competent conservatives. I hope that succeeds because, it's clear that Republican presidents won't tolerate a civil service that's full of ideological Democrats who are career appointees. So I hope we can get some competent conservatives in there because otherwise we're not going to have competent people at all.
Right.
But the whole thing is downstream of education polarization. The whole thing happened because the pool of competent conservatives has shrunk massively and most of the competent people are now Dems. That's ultimately the root of all problems here.
I wonder if that will change going forward. Do you have any reason to believe that there might be less education polarization in a Trump, is the educational polarization kind of artificially sort of contributed to? For example, it seems that there was some, polarization on Twitter towards the left but that was like contributed to by the ownership. And now that there's more now towards more right wing, or X more right wing, that's because Elon owns it. Could you see something even close to that happening in universities where there's a mild shift rightward because of some structural changes?
Yeah. I think I think the sort of the fall of wokeness will produce somewhat of a rightward shift. That's just a natural, the vibe shift, if you will. Gosh, that's a silly term. We live in an age of silly terms. So I think that the vibe shift will entail some natural shift and reduction of education polarization after a while. I mean, look, in tech, we're already seeing people who would have called themselves liberals back in 2012 are now either calling themselves conservatives or just obviously conservative. I'd say Mark Andreessen's among those. Like Mark Andreessen was a liberal, now he's conservative, and that's okay. I've seen people shift from liberal to conservative in my life as they age, but also just as things change. The left goes too far, and then the right goes too far. When I was growing up, the right was very aggressive toward like gays and stuff. It was not fun. It was not like, they're kind of jerky, and it made sense to be a liberal at the time. And the right was very confident about things like the Iraq War, and was doing some stupid stuff with financial deregulation anyway, and opposed the expansion of the welfare state that eliminated most poverty in America. There were good reasons to be a liberal. Then, by the time you get to 2020, being a liberal or being on the left means things like thinking America is structurally racist and supporting anti-white discrimination at every level of society. That's not something that I want to sign on to. And I think that's not something that a lot of people like, surprisingly many people wanted to sign on to that. But I think that ultimately that's not sustainable. That's not a thing that people will sustainably like, that sort of pervasive discrimination regime. And so I think that you're going to get people who just are like, oh God, I'm tired of this. And then you'll get a preference cascade where people who went along with it just to get along now stop going along with it. And they're like, I was always anti-woke. Yeah, I think you'll see that. Of course, the things like the Trump executive order against affirmative action might help, or not even affirmative action. I think that's not going to do anything. I think it's the executive order against DEI that will do something. Basically, they're going to hunt down anyone associated with DEI and fire them. And I think this will have reverberations throughout society. I think they will eventually manage to get rid of much of the DEI bureaucracy in companies and universities. That will happen. They may also manage to revoke the charitable status of many nonprofits, that focus heavily on this stuff. And then I do think that they will make headway in their institutional war, because there's just not a lot of energy to oppose them anymore. In the late 2010s, there was so much leftist energy to they could build DEI faster than Trump could tear down DEI, much faster. They just kept building it up and building it up, building it up at every level of society, and Trump couldn't even track it, right? He didn't even know what it was. The word DEI wasn't even popularized. And so, but I think that this time they came in prepared, and there's very little energy to support DEI. Very few people are willing to get up and fight for it. It was always a little ashamed of itself, because I think even the people involved in it knew very explicitly that it was a regime of pervasive racial discrimination. And no one feels very good about that. People told themselves it was good for ideological reasons. They cloaked it in various terms that made it more palatable to themselves. And then I think that at the end of the day, they knew they were getting away with something. They knew they were doing something wrong. And so I think that the shame of having participated in that, often opportunistically, will be one more thing minimizing resistance to Trump's attempts to roll it back. So I think Trump will be largely successful. It will take another decade for DEI to sort of rattle its last, but that effort failed.
Yeah. And maybe we'll see it, look at it historically as kind of like a second civil rights movement, or
I don't know about that, because I think the civil rights movement is largely successful. I think we'll be more likely to see DEI as a successor to, say, the Black Power movement. More, although it wasn't the same. Black Power movement was a street movement that was often violent, or it was a very outsider movement, while DEI was the consummate insider movement. So I think in that sense, I don't mean to say that these were similar movements, but I think that the way that people sort of became very, very enthusiastic about Black Power for a short time in the late 60s and early 70s, and then it became a fringe idea that eventually died to the point where The Office could make fun of it in the 2000s. that's where DEI is headed. I think it will hold on as a thing, especially in nonprofits and in some companies who just choose to do it, and and then in some government organizations will like secretly do it, and some universities will like secretly sneakily do it, and then that'll hold out for like another decade at least, maybe more than a decade. But then I think that overall it will be smooshed during the next 4 to 6 years.
Fascinating. You mentioned China, and I do want to segue to China because you wrote this great. Well, first you've been talking about tariffs for a long time, and sort of the, that targeted tariffs are better policy than broad tariffs, and Tyler Cowen picked that up, and maybe the Trump admin is listening, hopefully. But you also wrote about the Pettis paradigm. Is that how I pronounce the name? Pettis?
Yeah, Michael Pettis.
Michael Pettis. And sort of what he said about tariffs as it relates to China, what it might do to China's economy, and how maybe other economies should respond in terms of tariffs on China. Why don't you talk about what you were trying to say in that post?
Right. So international economics is really hard. Things like trade deficits and exchange rates, and we don't know why trade deficits and surpluses happen. We don't know why exchange rate movements happen. We don't know why international financial flows happen, et cetera, et cetera. We don't even really understand the patterns of specialization in trade between countries. It's so complex. There's many things you should think about. And so there's a lot of theories and not a lot of conclusive results. Then there's this other thing called a gravity model, which gets empirically the volumes of trade between countries very right, but for reasons we cannot understand. This is really hard. So along comes this guy, Michael Pettis, and I don't want to give him too much credit. He's not the sole sort of inventor of this paradigm, but he comes along and says, it's all about consumption versus production. That's the key. He divides things into consumption, production, exports, investment, domestic, foreign, some basically some gross flows, and talks about these as if these are autonomous, as if these move on their own. That there were a bunch of people who tried to talk like that back in the sort of 50s. There were people who tried to talk like that, and eventually they lost out in academia to people who wanted to think more about the micro foundations, the nuts and bolts of things. But this is an old style of thinking called sectoral balances. It's the idea that, okay, so China subsidizes the production sector, so they produce a lot, but then they consume less because they're subsidizing the production sector by taxing the consumption sector, and so then they, their production causes us to consume their production, so we then overconsume and blah blah blah, and so then we produce less. But then tariffs will then protect our production sector, so tariffs will increase production and then decrease consumption. You see how this works? It's simple. It's simple as hell. You can understand it. A bank, macro guy can just understand this and write this in a little note, right? A macro research guy can understand it. A government policymaker can understand it. A columnist can understand it. It's so easy to understand. Whereas orthodox international economics that tries to go beyond that and just sort of tries to have a more credible, complete theory than just like consumption, production, blah, blah, blah. Those things are kind of just, they get really complex and they don't have much empirics to support them anyway, because they're so complex that data can't really bear on their arguments one way or another. And so they end up going by the wayside. And then this makes economists really mad because Pettis isn't engaging with the literature at all. So Krugman got mad at Pettis, and Tyler Cowen got mad at Pettis. So then some of Pettis's conclusions are fairly easily contradicted by a simple economic model. So, for example, the idea that tariffs will increase domestic production, right? Tariffs will, and the idea that because we're a trade deficit country, tariffs will definitely increase domestic production. Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, like I can show you a simple model in which that's not true, right? In which tariffs basically reduce production because they reduce the other country's ability to buy our products. So tariffs kill exports by depriving other countries of the foreign exchange they need to buy our products. That's a simple model. I can make you a little more complex model where tariffs on intermediate inputs will hurt production because we can't get the copper and the steel and the stuff. So Trump is an idiot for putting tariffs on that stuff because that's low value stuff that our companies buy, in order to make complex high value shit like John Deere tractors or Boeing airplanes or, Teslas in America. We make these things, or semiconductor manufacturing equipment we make in America. We make these things, but we need these metals. We need to import these metals. Now, I agree we shouldn't import them from China, but if you just put tariffs on like these as a whole, all it does is it makes inputs more expensive for our companies. That's just very obvious econ. And Pettis doesn't grapple with this at all. He doesn't. He does not grapple with the problem of intermediate inputs, taxing intermediate inputs. He just ignores it, just sails right past it. Nor does he grapple with the movement of exchange rates that cancel out tariffs. So when I put tariffs on you, my exchange rate tends to go up, which cancels out at least part of the effect of the tariffs and possibly most of it. Certainly that's what happened in Trump's first term when he put tariffs on China. The United States dollar went up, and our trade deficit didn't really fall because our dollar went up. And we were able to purchase more stuff, which compensated for the trade, for the tariffs in terms of our trade deficit. So that happened. And Pettis doesn't grasp that. He doesn't grapple with that either. I'm sure he grasps it. He doesn't grapple with it. He doesn't deal with it. Now, Tyler Cowen's mad at this, and Paul Krugman is mad at this. And when Tyler Cowen and Paul Krugman are both mad at you, you have sinned against the gods of economics, all right? Because when those guys both think that you're full of crap, you've done something. Well, anyway, here's the thing. Pettis's analysis is highly specific to China, where he lived for a long time, and which he relentlessly focuses on in his analysis. Very specific to China. And his thesis is China's overproducing, which impoverishes Chinese people because they're taxing the consumption sector to overproduce, and it hurts American production. And then those two things are true. You don't actually need this sectoral balances idea to come up with this specific idea for China. In fact, a very simple model of trade will tell you this. If you tax households to subsidize producers in a standard Ricardian two-sector, two-country model of trade, right? Then yes, the foreign producers will lose and the domestic consumers will lose. This is really simple and obvious. You don't need this sectoral balance of thinking to think about that. And so tariffs can cancel by the other country can cancel out your subsidies. So in the real world, there is a more complicated effect. So that's with like very simple stuff like constant returns to scale and You don't need to reinvent economics to get this result for China and America specifically. You just don't. And so, but the simple way that Pettis talks about it is a lot more simple than what I just said to you. And it's certainly a lot more simple than drawing a graph. So talking about consumption versus production, blah, 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 is a simple, highly comprehensible thing that Chinese, policymakers, so the people who advise China's policymakers are all smart. The Chinese policymakers are increasingly dumb old guys appointed by Xi Jinping for their loyalty. And those guys can understand production versus consumption. They can understand Pettis. They can't understand international economics as it's typically practiced. They couldn't understand what I just said to you, and they definitely couldn't understand whatever you'd find in a paper or text, but they could understand Pettis. So my sort of Straussian reading of Pettis is that Pettis is trying to get China's leaders to do the right thing, even if he has to play fast and loose with the theoretical concepts and facts. Because as far as China's concerned, the stuff he's saying is pretty true. And it's not hard to see why. So that's my thought on Pettis.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Every time I hop on the 101 freeway in SF, I look up at the various tech billboards and think, damn, turpentine should definitely be up there. And I bet I'm not alone. In a world of endless scrolling and ad blockers, sometimes the most powerful way to reach people is in the real world. That's where AdQuick comes in. The easiest way to book out-of-home ads, like billboards, vehicle wraps, and airport displays. The same way you would order an Uber. Started by Instacart alums, AdQuick was born from their own personal struggles to book and measure ad success. AdQuick's audience targeting, campaign management, and analytics bring the precision and efficiency of digital to the real world. Ready to get your brand the attention it deserves? Visit adquick.com today to start reaching your customers in the real world. Again, that's adquick.com.
That's a good overview. What is sort of the latest thinking or latest updates on the tariff situation, or are we just kind of waiting with bated breath?
We're waiting with bated breath because what Trump is doing is basically he's threatening massive tariffs on any country that doesn't do every specific thing he wants. So he's like, hey, Colombia, take these deportees. Colombia's like, no. He's like, all right, 100% tariffs. Colombia's like, okay. And then he's like, so now he's threatening tariffs on Taiwan, hopefully not because he's in the pocket of China, hopefully because he's trying to force them to do something we need to get them to do, like build up their defense against China. or stop secretly, sneakily evading our export controls by selling chips to China, or, invest more in America. It's something that we need the Taiwanese to do, and that they don't necessarily do because a lot of Taiwan is controlled by KMT guys who have pro-China sympathies. And so if he's doing that, I could understand it. And then he'll be like, okay, just kidding about the tariffs on semiconductors. I won't actually do that, which is his pattern before. He's done that a million times. We know this is how he works. But if he actually does those tariffs, and it's because China told him to do that, we're kind of fucked. So, I don't know what he's going to do or why he's doing it. And that creates risk. I don't like that this kind of government, because I don't like things that create risk and uncertainty. Certainty and predictability is good for business. And America has had a remarkable run of economic growth, including the first Trump term and Biden's term. We've had a really remarkable run. I would hate to see that delayed by someone who just created so much uncertainty in the business climate that businesses stopped investing and just sat on the sidelines.
Yeah. That
also inflation. Tariffs hurt inflation. They raise prices, and they can increase expectations that prices will rise further. I don't want to see inflation. Don't we hate inflation? Don't we think it's bad? I think so. Yeah. Anyway, I think tariffs, these constant tariff threats, could raise inflationary expectations, even if the tariffs don't really go into effect, or only go into effect for a short time. They could make people think, well, prices are going up on something, because I hear about them tariffs. And then they could just start raising prices, and you could get an inflationary spiral. Then suddenly your eggs are going through the roof. Eggs actually are going through the roof again, although that's because of bird flu. But yeah, so then it's funny, eggs just spiked more than they ever did during the Biden administration. You don't hear a peep. You don't hear a peep from the Republicans who are sitting all day yelling around about inflation. You don't even hear a peep from the leftists who are all soft pro-Trump people. Like, oh, suddenly they don't care about inflation. But normal people do care about inflation. Normal people will get mad if this goes on. Not just the eggs, but I mean, like if kicking out our agricultural workers, half of whom are illegal immigrants, or putting up massive tariffs, or just threat of tariffs, whatever. If this starts to bite, we could get stagflation in America. We could get the 70s in America. Trump could be Carter 2. Do you want that? I do not want that.
Although one thing you said is that, or you wrote about, is that Carter actually has a strong deregulation legacy that people don't fully appreciate, like even more than Reagan.
That's right. He does. Carter deregulated trucking and rail and airlines and oil and gas and finance and beer, deregulated beer. He deregulated so much stuff, much more than Reagan ever did. Carter was the great deregulator, but we need to do a lot more deregulation. Maybe Trump will do it, maybe he won't. I don't know. But maybe he'll just flail around with executive orders, or I don't even know what he'll do. But we definitely need more deregulation now. But Carter was a big deregulator.
But his negative aspects of his legacy include his sort of, you mentioned the sort of a bad economy and bad foreign policy, basically.
Bad foreign policy, maybe. Actually, I don't know as much about that, but I do know that stagflation, that's what everyone hated the most. And maybe if suddenly people start losing their jobs, and suddenly the economy turns down and growth goes bad and your stock goes down, and at the same time, the price of everything is going up, and so your incomes are going down too, well, then people will not be happy. And then Trump could get kicked out. And then there could be a backlash where Dems win Congress and start opposing Trump on a lot of stuff. And we see constitutional crises between Trump and the Democratic Congress in the second half of Trump's term. We could see all these things. I wish that Trump would be a responsible steward of the economy. He was during his first term. It's not hard. Just don't fuck shit up. He was so good at that during his first term. And now he's just like going around smashing things. And so we'll see what happens. We'll see how much of this it takes to have an effect. Maybe it won't. Maybe people just have learned to not take anything he says seriously. And so the expectations and the economy, investment and things like that won't actually react. And then Trump will not follow through on his threats, except for in a few cosmetic cases. Maybe. It's hard to tell. So I'm going to sit back and wait and see.
I want to segue to another post that you wrote, which was a contrarian post, because it was about the bullish case for the Middle East. And typically when people talk about the Middle East, they're bearish. So why don't you outline your argument there, or your case for it?
Well, so the regions can turn around fast. And if you look at Europe had a couple centuries of extreme warfare, mostly related to the Reformation, but also with a changing from dynastic sort of politics to city-states, and the sort of disbursement of wealth from the South America. So Spain mined a bunch of silver and gold in South America. It spent this hiring mercenaries to interfere with a lot of stuff, the Habsburgs. And then, but France also started to have a few colonies of its own, started to throw its own weight around and get more organized as a nation state. Sweden started to get organized as a nation state. And so the Habsburg dynasty in the 30 Years' War sort of fought the new proto-nation states. But there was also a big Catholic Protestant aspect to this as well. And so there were the wars of religion, blah, blah, blah. You would have looked at that and you would have said, these guys are NGMI, man. They're not going to make it. This is a continent of endemic religious warfare. These people are idiots. They produce nothing. They produce wool. And the only way they'll ever make money is just extracting it from mines in South America. That's the only way these people can ever make money. 100 years later, Europe was on top of the world. Wow, cool. What happened? Well, a bunch of stuff happened. First of all, the 30 Years' War sort of tired everybody of war. So after that, they switched to limited war for like a little over a century. And so people got tired of big wars. The 30 Years' War depopulated Germany, man. It was like Black Plague level of bad. And so people got tired of wars for a while. Then later they got into wars again, but they got tired of wars for a while. And so they stopped fighting each other and started focusing their efforts on colonizing the globe. But also they focused their efforts on economic development. And so you had tax systems improved. There was the scientific revolution, then later the Industrial Revolution. You know, proto-state formation formed like bureaucracies, and then you had infrastructure and blah, blah, blah. And so you had a lot of the modern institutions built after that 30 Years' War, and also science being done. The Middle East, I don't think, is going to see anything as transformational as the Industrial Revolution unless AI does that. Who knows what will happen then? But I think, AGI, all bets are off. I don't know. But I think that the end of oil and the rise of green technology is going to really benefit the Middle East a lot for a few reasons. One reason is a little unintuitive. It's the end of the oil curse. So the oil curse is when the resource curse. The oil curse is when you have a lot of oil, then governments don't have to invest in the capabilities of the people in education and property rights and good courts and all these things in order to make money. They just need to tax the oil. They just sip from they drink your milkshake. They slice off some of the bounty of oil extraction. And so then what that also means is that you tend to get authoritarian political systems because he who sits on top of the pyramid of government is the one who gets all the oil revenues, like the Saudi oil sheiks or whoever, right? The Iranian Revolutionary Guard. The top dog gets the oil, but that means there's an incentive to be top dog. And when there's an incentive to be top dog, you get civil wars. So those are sort of the two forms of the resource curse: lack of investment in public goods and like human capital, and fighting. So oil has been bad for the Middle East. It's been good for Middle East living standards, but it's been bad for the long-term political economic development of the Middle East because you saw everybody just fighting everybody. And you saw not much investment in human capital or infrastructure, institutions, anything. So that sucked. But now that oil is it's not going to go away because we'll need it for chemical feedstocks, plastics, and everything else. But it'll be much less in use as a transportation fuel, which will severely limit oil revenues. This is good. This will force Middle Eastern countries to do other stuff. Already they're trying to diversify, so that's good. And that will make them more stable as countries. The second thing is the Middle East is incredibly sunny and has a lot of desert. What can you build in a place that's incredibly sunny and has a lot of desert? Well, solar panels. And then you can pipe that solar energy anywhere you want with enough cables. And so you just build solar. So Middle East is going to have the cheapest energy. Guess what else you get when you have super cheap energy? Well, you like Casey Hanmer, right? Cheap desalination. One of the Middle East's big problems, long-term problems, is it's a desert, man. You can't do agriculture there, so you can't support that many people locally. And then you get bread riots in Egypt, blah, blah, blah. They're going to make the desert bloom with cheap desalination, powered by solar power. It's a green solar punk. The Middle East is going to be the solar punk, place with just terraforming everywhere. They're going to terraform themselves with cheap energy. They've got everything they need. And it's going to make them better as countries too. It's going to make them less authoritarian, I think. Also, on top of that, they've got a very favorable demographic situation right now. They don't have too many kids, but they also don't have too few kids yet. So they're in the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of their sort of where they sit geopolitically as it relates to the broader Cold War, how do you, and then kind of their own infighting, and uprisings, sort of, how do you?
They're going to really benefit from the end from the end of superpower interest in the Middle East. So Russia and Syria was very damaging, and we in Iraq were very damaging. Those influences are going to go away largely. Maybe China will step in and do something, but I don't know. But certainly, we stirred up trouble in Iraq. We kicked a hornet's nest, and Russia brutalized Syria. And those things are going to be less common now that Russia's focused on Europe and Ukraine, and now that America just realizes we don't have any real interest in the Middle East, and so we're kind of fucking off. So I think that this will be good for the Middle East. In terms of other geopolitical stuff, I don't think it really matters. The Middle East needs to be left alone to develop for a while. They just need to be left alone for a while. And I think the decreasing importance of oil is one reason to think that they will actually be left alone. They'll get what they'll need.
You mentioned how regions could change quickly, and you started talking about Europe. I do want to spend a few minutes talking, better understanding the European psyche. Elon has been meddling in Europe, and I think there's a broader question as to, will the vibe shift that's happened in the US also happen in Europe? Because it seems like in Europe, we've talked about the degrowth sort of position. Mike Solana likes to say that Europeans hate themselves, like they don't stand up for themselves. They let their sort of, this is inflammatory in some sense, but let their countries be invaded. They are too shameful of their heritage, and maybe rightfully so in certain scenarios, but maybe sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and are ripe for pickings in terms of sort of foreigners coming in and not assimilating because they don't sort of believe it strongly enough. But then also this just broadly anti-growth, anti sort of human impact on the environment. What is sort of the European psyche here, if you can help me understand it? And do you think it's likely to change as the vibe shift? Is the vibe shift going to hit Europe?
I think it will, but I don't think Elon's going to be the vector of it. I think he'll, if anything, he'll delay it by, sort of oppositional negative polarization, right? Oh, we can't crack down on the refugees because Elon, that's what Elon wants. We can't deregulate because that's what Elon wants. I think there'll be some of that. That's silly, unfortunate. I don't know. But then, which doesn't mean that I necessarily I think they should crack down on the refugees. But I think that their immigration models have been too copied from the United States and not suitable for their own societies. So I think a lot of these societies would have been better served to get immigrants from countries other than the ones they did. Yeah, I'm zeroing in on the UK, Germany, and some Scandinavian countries, maybe Netherlands. They would have been better served. I think when Germany took a bunch of immigrants from Turkey, that was probably, there were tensions. There were certainly tensions. There was certainly some discrimination, but I think that was largely a good move. But taking a whole bunch of refugees from Afghanistan, maybe not as good a move. Humanitarian, maybe, but maybe not as good a move in terms of the stability of their society. Yeah, I think they made some mistakes because they just sort of, they went on ideology, which Europeans tend to do. We are more pragmatic than the Europeans. And they went a lot on ideology, and they didn't realize they weren't America. That Europe is not America. They don't assimilate people as well as we do. Do you ever hear about Afghan people causing trouble in America? No. They just go and, sell real estate in East Bay. Yeah, we don't have those problems, but then in Europe, those people are boxed out of jobs. They can't go sell real estate in the East Bay because that's not open to them. So they just get mad. And then, they don't have money, so girls don't want the guys, and so they get frustrated, and they harass girls maybe. And you can say, well, they have third world morality and blah blah blah. It's true to some degree, but you should assimilate them. And in America, people very quickly grasp how they're supposed to behave in America. I think you do not see many episodes of mass bad behavior in America. Haitians did not, in fact, eat the pets. That didn't happen. You do not see, you see some isolated incidents. The Somali communities in Maine and Minnesota have not just rampaged. It does not look like Somalia. The alt-right idea, the rightist idea that if you import people from a country, they'll just act like they live in that country in America. Import the third world, become the third world. Well, that hasn't been true. we imported the third world and remained the first world, right? I'm not saying assimilation is instantaneous for every person, but it's really powerful and it goes pretty fast. But not in Europe, because they're not like that. They're not as welcoming as we are. They don't, if your ancestors weren't Danish or whatever, they're not going to just say like, oh, hi, random Somalian person, you're Danish now, you're a Dane. We say, oh, hi, you're an American. We still do that. The rightists don't do that, but normal Americans do that. But Denmark isn't going to do that. You're not a Dane. You're like a permanent guest. And if permanent guests get mad and they don't appreciate being permanent guests, especially after the first generation, they don't have birthright citizenship either. So birthright citizenship is really important for assimilation. If you want immigrants to become Americans, you give their kids citizenship. In Europe, you can have people who like live there and generations don't have citizenship. You can't have that. Often they do take citizenship, but when they grow up and become 18, renounce form of citizenship. But birthright citizenship, important tool of assimilation. Suburbs, cheap housing, important tool of assimilation. I can get a lawn. Last week I was in Somalia. Now I'm in Texas. I get a lawn. I have a car. I'm doing pretty well. That's that happens in America. And of course, some universities try their best to like undo this by connecting people to like these ethnic separatist struggle movements and area studies classes and stuff like that. But at the same time, but they sort of fail. They get a few angry people to be activists, like sort of anti-American activists who have some racial grievance against America. Universities and area studies curriculum do that. They do this, and like ethnic clubs in college and things like this. They do some of this, but overall, they fail at this, and people all just become a bunch of Americans. You and I hang out with a lot of immigrants, and we hang out with even more kids of immigrants. How many people do we know whose ancestors go back, 12 generations in America?
Not a ton.
A couple, a handful. Like almost everyone we know is a recent descendant of immigrants. And yet we don't know anyone who just like acts obviously un-American. I mean, do you? I don't.
I think you made a good argument on this other podcast that we'll release where you debated Aaron McIntyre, and you said sometimes immigrants are even more American than or more loving of America than people who've been here so many generations. And that's actually my critique of Europe to some degree. Is sometimes when I talk to someone who's like fifth generation of something super a wealthy family, often or sometimes they're really apologetic for it, and they almost embarrassed of it. It's like they're more likely to be the people in the museums, ruining the art in favor of Greta Thunberg or whatever. Like they really hate themselves, and I wonder if that's almost like a metaphor for how Europe might feel, where they are in some sense long removed from their era of greatness and era of struggle, or concrete struggle. And when you're sort of spoiled in some sense, or sort of you become very apologetic. Whereas immigrants, they're like, fuck yeah, fuck America, fuck yeah, America, love America. So I came to this country, American dream. My parents are immigrants, they're obsessed with America. They cry.
Your parents are immigrants. I didn't know that.
Yeah, my dad's Israeli and my mom's Colombian.
Right, I did know that. You told me that before, and I hadn't realized that before. Okay, so Israel and Colombia. Okay, so you're another of the famous Hispanic Jews, along with Matt Iglesias and Ezra Klein.
Oh wow, rarefied air, yeah.
Yeah, and now Antonio Garcia Martinez, because he converted.
Yeah, he's welcomed into the club.
That's the future of America is just a bunch of like Hispanic Jews.
Yeah, exactly. Terminally online Hispanic Jews.
I love it. Wait a second. Does this make you technically a person of color?
Well, it's funny because my brother looks like my mom. I look more like my dad. So I maybe technically, but I don't think no one ever said that I pass.
Nice. Yeah. Let's we have some we're not completely 100% white in this podcast.
Too bad DEI is it's not the season.
We've DEI'd. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm still all white then.
Well, what generation again?
4. I'm 4th. My ancestors come from Lithuania on my dad's side, and what's now Ukraine on my mom's side, but is what used to be Austria-Hungary. So it's the area around Lviv in Ukraine is where my mom's side.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, like we don't know that many people who are descended from like Mayflower people. Brad DeLong, he's descended from the Mayflower like 5 different ways. He's like the most blue-blooded guy we know. But none of our friends are. They're all from somewhere else. And you know, they're like as American as they come. Like there's no lack of assimilation there. You wouldn't know the difference between them and people born in Connecticut, you know, to like a 4th generation family. Like maybe they have like a little accent or something like that. Or but yeah, America assimilates very well. Europe does not. Japan doesn't, although Japan actually does better than Europe, at least for immigrants who are ethnically different, who look kind of, you know, Asian-ish. Like Japan actually assimilates those people pretty quickly, but they're not as good as America. And then for you know, like other like white people, they'll much worse at assimilating than like America. But then we're the best. We're better. You know, I'm starting to think we're better than Canada. I always thought Canada was the one country that was better than us at this. Now I'm starting to think that maybe in some ways we may be a little ahead of Canada here. I'm not sure, but Canada's also really good. But yeah, these European countries, you know, they didn't take into account their own fundamentally different self-concepts as civilizations, you know, which affect how people assimilate. And I don't know what they should do, honestly. Like, I don't know what the right move is for them. You know, some places have like, I think Denmark have like active assimilation policies where they take kids from like immigrant ghettos and like send them to school all day for like 8 hours of training in like how to be a real Dane or something like that. I don't know if that's going to work. Maybe it'll work. I don't know. We actually tried to do something like that back in the day. We had the 100% American movement, where we actually sent like random people into German immigrants' houses we sent observers into German immigrants' houses to Americanize them and force them to be American. And even the government even made this like mandatory during like World War I, which is, by the way, China does this to Uyghurs. China sends Han people into Uyghurs' houses to like Hanify them or to like assimilate them. You know, keep tabs on them for like anti-Chinese activities. We did this to Germans. What China's doing to Uyghurs, we did to Germans. Well, we didn't. We actually did round them up into concentration camps for a while. So we did put Germans in concentration camps during World War I, and again during World War II, but fewer during World War II. But then it was tens of thousands, I think, of Germans, on the order of tens of thousands. It wasn't quite as big as the Japanese internment, but the German internment was significant. And then we also sent all these we terrorized the hell out of our German immigrants back in World War I. Like, people forget this. People do not realize how similar America of 100 years ago was to like China today. We're not, you know, they're worse than us in many ways, but you know, we never did zero COVID, I suppose, but we did a lot of bad stuff. There's a book called American Midnight about this. We did a lot of really repressive stuff around World War I time. That's somewhat similar to what China has done under Xi Jinping, and people just don't know it. Memory hold.
Well, I would be mindful of time. This has been a fascinating conversation about you know, wide ranging from Trump's executive orders to tariffs in China to the Middle East to Europe. Noah, is always a great conversation. Until next time.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and erictorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.